All right, so we're still in the first book of Samuel, and right, we're still in the first book of Samuel, and we have gotten into chapter 16, and we quickly looked over the beginning of the first half of the chapter last time. I'm going to go over the same slides that I looked at last time, just to give us a little bit of a running start, and then we'll get into the second half of this chapter. So God sends Samuel to Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now God questions Samuel's continued mourning for Saul and tells him he has selected a new king who he sends Samuel to. Samuel worries Saul will find out and kill him. God provides Samuel with a cover story for his meeting with Jesse the Bethlehemite. Samuel is to take a heifer and say he has come to sacrifice it and invite Jesse. Samuel goes to Bethlehem, where the city elders ask if he comes peaceably. And there's just a kind of an offhand statement there, but I think there's a lot in that statement that they're concerned about whether or not Samuel comes peaceably. Remember, this comes right after a very public rift between Samuel and Saul. At the end of that rift, the text told us that Samuel was never going to come to Saul again. In fact, Samuel almost left, and Saul begs him to stay, and he does stay, and that's when it's when Samuel slays Agag, who Saul should have slayed. But so everybody seems to know about this. Everybody seems to know that there is a rift between the two most powerful people in the country, the king and Samuel the prophet. And so they're worried that Samuel plans to do something in opposition to Saul, which in fact he's going to do, right? He is there to find the new king. So this is in opposition to Saul's leadership. They don't know what he's going to do, but they're a little nervous about it. They think if he comes there to cause trouble for Saul, they may feel Saul's wrath. And so they ask if he comes peaceably, but Saul only tells them that he has come to make a sacrifice as God had instructed him to do. Okay, so Samuel anoints David. Samuel assumes the new king will be Jesse's oldest son, Eliab, based on his appearance, but the Lord tells Samuel he does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And it was noted when we looked at this last week that Saul, on the other hand, looked like a king, right? He was very tall and looked very kingly. But this king is not going to be chosen based on his appearance. This is in contrast to Saul, where Saul's impressive height is mentioned more than once and appears to be a significant part of why the people accept him as king. When God rejects all of Jesse's present sons, Samuel asks if there are any more. And there is one, the youngest, who is keeping the sheep. Samuel sends for him, and God selects him. So Saul anoints the youngest son of Jesse, David. Okay. So this brings us to the distressing spirit. If you were here last week, I gave you a little preview of the questions I was going to ask today. I think the first one is a little bit easier of the two. But let's read about this distressing spirit first. But the spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servants said to him, surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. So first I want to ask, where are we? Here we go. Why does the spirit of the Lord depart from Saul? Is disobedience. Exactly right. We've seen it at least twice, right? We saw it in chapter 13 when he offered the sacrifice when he should have waited for Samuel. We saw it again in chapter 15 when he was supposed to slay Agag, and he spared the king of the Amalekites. He let the children of Israel take some of the spoils with them. He wasn't supposed to do these things. So Saul has been disobedient to God, and as a result, God's spirit has now departed from Saul. Okay. Tougher question. What is a distressing spirit from God? Note that Saul's servants recognized that the distressing spirit was from God. They could tell. This wasn't just, Saul's just not normal upset. In verse 15, if we go back to it there real quick. And Saul's servants said to him, surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. So this doesn't seem so strange to them, but it maybe seems a little strange to me. So what is a distressing spirit from God?
Go back to
Yes,
sir.
Second Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11, where I agree, God you in the living.
Yeah, I actually had that on a slide up here, and I took it out And because I wanted to look at it later, I should have left it up here so we could look at it now. I'll find that and read that since I have the microphone on.
God will send upon them a delusion, influence, so that they believe what is false in order that they may be good. It's kind of the same principle, I think.
Yeah, let me read that real quick. 2 Thessalonians 2. Verse 9. The coming of the lawless one is according to the works of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So you see similarities between these two passages. You want to elaborate on that, or?
Well, he saw, but he's given everything, he saw what's good, how to do it, and yet, he didn't know, he said, I obey God, but he didn't really obey God. So the same principle can be seen in our worship today. Are we hearing what God said, or are we actually doing what God said?
So I think the point, if I'm understanding correctly, is that what we see in 2 Thessalonians, it starts with disobedience first. God doesn't just say, oh, I don't like that guy, I'm going to send him a delusion. It started with their disobedience, and because of their disobedience, God did that. And maybe we see that here, right? Because this starts with Saul's disobedience. Go ahead.
I was thinking about this in your previous question. Why did the Spirit come from God? And the reason ultimately is because Saul left God.
Yeah.
And I think the purpose of that Spirit and the reference in 2 Thessalonians is if we choose to leave God in a effort to try to get us to change our mind, God shows us a glimpse of what that's like. What a life without God is. He sends the Spirit to show us that, ultimately hoping that we would turn around and come back.
Okay, so you're saying this could be a chastising spirit. This isn't just God being mean to Saul. This could be God giving Saul a wake-up call, which the servant seemed to recognize. Right? I not thought about that. That's good. Other thoughts? Agreement, disagreement? Whose spirit is this, the distressing spirit? Is it God's spirit or another spirit? Because it could be that God's spirit leaves and then comes back with a different purpose, right? It departs from him in the sense that it's taking away that blessing of kingship, and then it's coming back with this intent to cause the stress. Or it could be that God's spirit departs and another spirit comes. Any thoughts?
I mean, it says that the Spirit departs and another.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels to me. It kind of strange if it's God's spirit leaving and coming back, but I think you can interpret it that way. But are you thinking it's a different spirit that comes back, not the Spirit of God?
I think it's whatever, it's a different type of spirit that God put in. Also, if you think about it, I mean, how many times have you messed up? You know, and your Saul knows when he's messed up and lost the kingdom.
Yeah.
That's gotta get it a little bit.
Yeah. There is that sense in which it seems like just knowing that God is against him could cause him to be distressed. But the way it's written here, it suggests that to me that it's more than just Saul's own spirit being troubled by what's happened, but God has literally sent a spirit to him. I think this is maybe parallel to what we'll see later in 1 Kings 22. We talk about God sending a spirit. We have a very abstract concept of God, I think. And so sometimes when we see passages like this or the passage in Job where God is portrayed as holding court in heaven, it maybe comes across a little strange, but this is from the Bible. This is the Bible's attempt to sort of show us what maybe cannot be explained in human words, but to show us as best can be some of the goings on in heaven. If we look at 1 Kings 22, 19-23, then Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the hosts of heaven standing by on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will persuade Ahab to go up that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead? So one spoke in this manner and another spoke in that manner. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. The Lord said to him, in what way? So he said, I'll go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets And the Lord said, you shall persuade him and also prevail. Go out and do so. Therefore, look, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets of yours, and the Lord has declared disaster against you. And the 2 Chronicles 18 also accounts the same event. This shows that there are instances where God can send another spirit, not his own spirit, but one of the spirits that dwell in heaven with him, as he did here. Is this the same idea of what we see in 1 Samuel, or I'm barking up the wrong tree here? What do you think? Is it clear what I'm getting at? I'll tell you, to sort of be plain, what I think is happening in 1 Samuel is, I think it's the Lord's Spirit is departing. I think it's another spirit's coming. And I base that on this text here, where we see God sending one of the spirits that is ministering to him in heaven down to earth to do something. And I see a parallel there in 1 Samuel. Eddie.
I think the one thing that we can be definitely sure of for 1 Samuel, God is in control of whatever spirit is afflicting or within Saul, and he took his personal spirit away from him.
Yeah, amen.
And that God is in control of what comes to him.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to sort of take inventory of what we know. We know for a fact that God's spirit withdrew. We don't know whether the spirit that came that was distressing was the spirit of God or a spirit like this. But I do want to bring up the possibility that it could have been, right? We don't know for certain that it's God's spirit coming back. It could have been a spirit like this that's coming to distress him. The other key point is that we know is either way it's from God, right? Because here it says, the Lord put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets of yours. So even though in this example, God isn't doing it directly himself by the action of his own spirit, God still takes credit for it. So back in 1 Samuel, even if another spirit has been sent to distress Saul, it's still by the will of God that this has happened, and God will take credit for it. I had a similar example there in Judges. We can kind of move on. Okay. So any other thoughts, comments on what we've looked at so far? Okay, so the solution that is found is for David to play the harp. On his servant's advice, Saul seeks a man who can skillfully play the harp for him, and David is chosen. Why does David play? I wish I had these. I meant to have these go one at a time. Why does hearing David play the harp cause a distressing spirit from the Lord to depart Saul?
I think it's all the
Providence of God. Yeah, I didn't know if I asked this question right, but that was exactly what I was kind of driving at, the providence of God. Because if we look, what's the result? The end result is that David is sent to play the harp for him. Saul loves David, and David becomes Saul's armor bearer. So the result of this distressing spirit coming upon Saul is that he needs a harp player to make him feel better. And the result of that is that David has brought into Saul's life and made an important person in Saul's life. So like you, I see the providence of God here at work. That this is God bringing about, pulling David into Saul's world. And the first step of making David an important person who's going to be set up to become king now that God has rejected Saul and chosen David. So Saul does not know that God has chosen David to replace him, and yet God has placed David close to Saul. Thoughts, comments? Okay, so I don't have very much to say on 1 Samuel 17, so I warned you this last time that if you guys want to talk about chapter 17 very much, you're going to have to bring some questions, comments, because I think we know this one very, very well. I do have a couple of points I want to bring up from the early part of the chapter, because I think they may come up later in the study. But before David fights Goliath, we learn the three oldest of Jesse's 8 sons followed Saul in battle. David had to go back and forth between serving Saul and tending sheep. And the people tell David that Saul will make the man who kills Goliath rich and will give him his daughter in marriage. So I put this comment, questions or comments. Again, I think we not only know this story really well, I think we kind of know the importance of this story really well because it's been talked about so much. So I told you, in the interest of time, I'm only going to get into it if you guys want to. So did anybody have a question or a comment about David slaying Goliath, either from your reading before class or just from your remembrance of the story that you wanted to bring up? Eddie.
There's one thing that has always stood out to me about the story is when Saul calls David into his tent. And that whole juxtaposition of what Saul had been before as opposed to what he is now. What he was before was the one chosen to fight all their battles for them. So now he's at the point where he's in the tent when there's a battle to be fought. And David, this young boy, is the one who actually is the one who wants to go and fight the battle and ends up fighting the battle for Israel that Saul would not.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, that we've totally flipped the script here, that Saul was originally the one chosen to fight their battles, and now he's in the tent about to send someone else out to fight his battles for him. And when I was reading this, I even wondered if Saul even still led the people in battle. I kind of think he does, but I base that totally on the fact that it says the three oldest children of Jesse followed him. To me, I kind of felt like that probably meant followed him in battle, but I was not sure because, as you say, Saul's main job here seems to be just sort of sit in a tent and maybe conduct it like a General Washington he's on the front lines, but he's behind the line instead of in the front of the line. And so, yeah, things have totally reversed themselves. Other thoughts or questions? Go ahead, Ben.
One thing that Elias said stood out to me in verse 44, it says that David, come to me, I will give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. In a very similar language to the way that God speaks about the provision of breaking the beasts of the field. And in that case, Goliath almost saying, like, I own these things, this is mine to give you today. And I can only imagine what that would be to God, the creator, who knows his things. Now here's David, this is his representation. Just flips that script.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I won't repeat that because I think I could hear it, so I think it could probably be heard over here. Anything else? So I'm going to jump down then to the end of chapter 17 and just use it to segue into chapter 18. After the battle, we read, starting with verse 55, when Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. So the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. Then as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? So David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. And this covenant, we'll see it reaffirmed when we get to chapter 20, verses 16 and 17. And underlined Abner, whose son is this youth, what Saul's statement there, Abner, whose son is this youth, because I think this is a little bit significant. Saul already knows David, right? David is the guy who can make him feel better when this distressing spirit comes upon him. His playing the harp makes the distressing spirit go away. And he's now also become an armor bearer for Saul. So Saul knows him, and not only does Saul know him, he is important to Saul as the harp player. But David has not been important. Even as he became important to the king for what he could do, David would not have been considered an important person. And this shows that because the king didn't see any reason to find out any details about the life of this unimportant person in his service. Saul now taking note of David to the point he wants to know more about him and more about his background, I believe shows that at this point, David is becoming an important person, a person who is important enough for even the king to want to know more about him. Okay, so things have started out pretty well. I'm going to jump into chapter 18. Again, I'm not going to be reading the chapters anymore because I'm asking you to read them. It'll help us go a little bit more quickly so that we can stay on the pace we need to be on. So I'm just going to jump in with looking at the chapter here. But Saul's love for David doesn't last very long. Verse 5. So David went out where Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul sent him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people and all the sight of Saul's servants. Now it happened as they were coming home, when David was returning from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women had come out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with the tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. So the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Can you hear that? Can you imagine that you're Saul? It started out so good if you're Saul, right? The first thing he hears is Saul has slaved his thousands. But then the next thing you hear, it all goes sour when David has his 10,000s. Verse 8, then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. Okay, so Saul tries to kill David for the first time, not the only time. David served Saul so well that the people begin to praise him more than Saul. We just read that. As a result, Saul becomes wary that David may take his kingdom. Saul even throws a spear at David twice, at least twice, and it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times, but there was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. The second time could be the one that we're going to read about in chapter 19, right? Could be kind of a preview of what's to come. If it's happened twice here back to back, then the event in chapter 19 would make 3 times. Okay, question. Is Saul being paranoid here?
He's been told the kingdom's been taken away.
Yeah. He's right, isn't he, right? There's other thoughts. He knows the kingdom. He should know he's losing the kingdom. Is he right to think that David is the one that's going to take it away from him? We know the end of the story, right? That's what's going to happen. So I don't think Saul is really paranoid here. Saul's fears are well-founded. The people love David. Jonathan loves David. And God has chosen David to replace Saul. Saul seems to sense that God has left him for David. Now, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul not only can he sense that he has lost the Spirit of God, not only has he been told, as Kevin points out, that the kingdom has been taken away from him, but he can sense that the Lord is with David. So he's not wrong. He knows what's coming, and he has not misjudged the situation. Oh, and Michael loves David too. I put Everybody Loves David. I remember the show Everybody Loves Raymond. There was a promo for that show years ago where the brother at the end, he just says, everybody loves Raymond. Just with this, just this sense of frustration. I can see Saul in my mind saying everybody loves Saul. Or everybody loves David. So sick of hearing about David. The women sing about David. My own son loves David. My daughter loves David. All the people, everybody loves David. And nobody loves King Saul anymore. So Saul offers David his oldest daughter, Merab. In 1725, there was an expectation among the men of Israel that Saul's daughter would be given to the man who slew Goliath. But Saul's primary motivation is shown to be that he wants David to keep fighting the Philistines in return for his daughter's hand. The second part of verse 17 says, only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let my hand not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. But then Merab is given to Adriel, I don't know how to say that, instead. This is happening in verses 18 and 19. I'm not sure what happened here other than Saul just resents David. He may also have taken advantage of David's humility to renege on the offer, because David's reaction is, who am I to marry the daughter of a king? So maybe Saul said, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. I'm not really sure. It definitely is a strange passage to me, and I think it reflects, to a certain extent, the tense situation that we're in. That David Saul on the one hand is offering his daughter as hand in marriage to David, but then goes and marries her to someone else. Thoughts or comments? But Saul's younger daughter, Michal, loved David, and they told Saul. Verse 20 says that they told Saul, so Michal doesn't go to Saul and tell her about her love for David. Apparently, they both tell Saul about this, and this is going to lead to David marrying Michal. Okay. Saul agrees to the marriage, but once again, his true motivation is to set David against the Philistines. Saul sets a bride price for David of 100 Philistine foreskins. David and his men kill 200 Philistines and bring their foreskins to Saul. David's success proves to Saul that God is with David. Thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David, so Saul became David's enemy continually. Right? Saul knows God has turned against him. Saul suspected that God was with David. Now Saul knows that David has God on his side. And I put "and his men" in bold there. This isn't a Samson with the jaw of an ass kind of moment where David has to go out there and kill 200 men all by himself with his bare hands. He has men, right? So maybe that makes the task a little easier, but it also shows us that David is becoming a more and more prominent person. He's not a little shepherd boy anymore. He is now a person who commands his own men in battle, and they will follow him. And when he says, we got to go get 100 foreskins, they say, well, let's go. We'll get 200. And they do, and they bring those back to Saul as his bride blessing. Okay. Thoughts or comments so far? See how we're doing on time. Oh my goodness, it's almost 9:30. Okay. We're making pretty good time though. Okay. Saul tells Jonathan and his servants to kill David. Verse 30, then the prince of the Philistines went out to war, and so it was, whenever they went out, that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. Now Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David, but Jonathan's, Saul's son, delighted greatly in David. So Saul tries to kill David. Again, I'm not going to read these verses. We should have read them coming into here, but we'll review some of the stuff that we would have read in these. Jonathan warns David that Saul is looking for an opportunity to kill him and tells David to go into hiding. Jonathan promises to speak to his father, and he does, meeting his father in the field and reminding him that David has done no wrong and has risked his own life killing Philistines. Saul gives an oath that David will not be put to death. Then Jonathan brings David to Saul. I proofread this morning and I found mistakes, and I knew I'd find more. Every time I read through it, I find mistakes in this. And Jonathan brings David to Saul. Okay. War breaks out with the Philistines again, and David goes back out to fight them. But then an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand while David was playing the lyre. Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him, and Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. Now, the evil here, this quote is from the New King James Version, where it does say evil. The NIV also says evil, but both have a footnote saying or harmful. And the ESV simply translates it harmful instead of evil. So if you prefer, we can put a harmful spirit from the Lord comes upon Saul. But either way, my question is Saul or God responsible for this attempt on David's life? If you heard people say the devil made me do it, well, can't Saul say God made me do it? I see a no. Is there a comment or just a no?
Saul's choice.
It's Saul's choice? Is it Saul's choice? Was there a comment over here? Pride? You say pride? How? So, so that's the ultimate source of all this, right? Is Saul's pride. Saul doesn't want to lose the kingdom. He could just give it up, right? He doesn't want to lose it. So it is his pride. But there's this kind of in-between step. It starts with, because of Saul's pride, he doesn't want to give up the kingdom. And it ends with, he throws a spear at David, but there's this in-between step where God sends a harmful spirit. So is God doing this through Saul, or is Saul responsible for this? So far. But what about this one? Is he still making his choices here? Or is God pushing him to do something he wouldn't have done otherwise? All of his choices. Yeah, it's not like he's doing something he never did before, is it? I mean, this is not the first time he chucked the spear at David when David was just trying to make him feel better playing the harp. Go ahead, Eddie.
I go back to your reference with Ahab and the lying spirit, and God said to that spirit, go and do that.
Yeah.
Be that
Yeah.
lying voice. But Ahab still made the choice to listen to the lying prophet because that's what he wanted to hear.
Great point.
Saul is still making the choice to kill David because that's what he wants.
Yeah, yeah. So even as the text is telling us that God is sort of motivating Saul here with this hurtful spirit, nothing in the text says Saul doesn't have a choice. Nothing in the text says Saul has been overpowered by the will of God and is now just acting like a puppet whose strings God is pulling. Other thoughts, other comments? Ben?
Something else I don't want to lose sight of too is just the fact that the only reason these spirits are able to dwell in Saul is because Saul lost God's spirit.
Yeah.
And that happened because of his own selfishness.
Yeah. Yeah.
I look at all the times in the New Testament that Jesus, the Son of God, is around demons or other evil spirits. They're scared of him.
Yeah.
They're deferential to him. They recognize that he's the most high, the most powerful. They don't want to have anything to do with him, and they're willing to listen to whatever he says. So if that spirit still reigned in Saul, we wouldn't have this problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, Saul is responsible because it's Saul's actions that put this in the moment. And this is where I put some examples of God hardening hearts and things, but let me skip down to this because we brought this up earlier. This is where I moved Dustin's point to because I thought it was appropriate here as well. The coming of a lawless one, and according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe the lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So you look at it, because they did not receive the love of the truth. That's where it starts. God doesn't just start with sending them a strong delusion. It's for this reason that God sent them a strong delusion, because they have already rejected the love of the truth. And then there in verse 12, that they may be condemned who did not believe the truth. And as Ben points out here, we see that same pattern with Saul, right? The Spirit is able to enter these harmful spirits, like we've seen here twice now, are able to enter Saul because he's lost the Spirit of God. And as Ben said, he's lost the Spirit of God because of his disobedience. So even if it seems like maybe God's being a little bit unfair by helping to push Saul's actions here, none of this happens if Saul stays faithful to God in the first place. Saul set all of this in motion through his disobedience. And as I said earlier, there's no mention of this spirit forcing him to throw a spear at David the first time or two, right? So Saul has already committed this same sin without any help from anybody else. Did you have another comment, Ben?
Well, just looking at the comparison between Saul and David, later on, we see David pray to God and say,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that David isn't going to be a horrible sinner, right? David is going to, eventually David is going, after he becomes king, he's going to kill Uriah the Hittite for the worst possible reason you could do it. Okay. So it's not a question of who sins and who never sins and who sins, right? David is capable of great sin. But David's response is to seek God. And we never see Saul do that in this. We never see Saul, he gets all these warnings and never once does he ever say, how can I make this right? And I think the reason for that is, even if he gets in the right relationship with God, he's going to lose the kingdom. He really wants to try to hold on to the kingdom more than he wants to have the right relationship with God. Okay. I'll skip through these. Okay, yeah, and some things we've already talked about here. Saul's disobedience did not begin here. Saul was already disobeyed God by offering the sacrifice. Samuel should have offered, sparing Agag, trying to get David killed already. And Saul has already thrown a spear at David at least once, and no mention was made of God causing it the first time. God is not inducing Saul to do anything he hasn't already done on his own. All right. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Okay, so let's look at Michal saving Saul's life. Okay, good. I was hoping we'd get into 19. Let's pick up the story with the second part of verse 10 in chapter 19. So David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers to David's house to watch him and to kill him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, put a cover of goat's hair for his head, and covered it with clothes. So when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. Then Saul sent the messengers back to see David, saying, bring him to me in the bed that I may kill him. And when the messengers had come in, there was the image of the bed with a cover of goat's hair for his head. Then Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me like this and sent my enemy away so that he has escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? I love this, that they go back to Saul because he's sick. David's sick. And David wants him to just bring the bed. If he's sick in bed, just bring the whole bed and I'll kill him. And at the end here, the language here, it says, Michal says, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? In English, that reads a little strange to me. I looked in other translations. I think the ESV has that same wording. I don't know if it just translates more naturally from the Greek, but if you look in the New King James translation of the Septuagint, it just says something like, and she said, he said he would kill me if I didn't let him go, so the meaning is much plainer. But I think you still get that meaning out of this. Let me go. Why should I kill you? Like, why should I don't really have to kill you, do I? Are you going to let me go? So she blames David, showing her own fear for her father and her father's wrath. Okay. Oh. Yeah. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. I mentioned, but it's a great question. Anybody want to tackle that? Why did she have an idol?
That's in David's house, correct?
Yeah, it seems to be in David's house. I'm sure his house is probably in Saul's house. They probably all live in some big compound together. You know, they're probably very close to each other. But yeah, it seems to be in David's house. At the very least, it's in Saul's house. Or yeah. Thoughts on that? What were the people doing? What were the Israelites doing just a few chapters ago that God wanted that Samuel had to repent of so that they could finally have victory in battle? What did they throw away? What's that? They're idols, right? They had a bunch of idols of Baal. And apparently everybody had them. They were very common. So the Israelites have been very slow to give up their household gods. And I don't know why David allows this. I don't know if it was, maybe she went next door and got one from somebody else's house, but it definitely seems like there's still this clinging to some of the old gods going on here, even in Saul's family. Even now that David has joined Saul's family, we still don't see a complete purge of these gods. And, you know, and I think, again, I like to make everything applicable. We spent quite a bit of time earlier talking about our own idols and the difficulty that we may have purging them, right? They have the same problem. And that's not an excuse, right? They need to work harder to purge these idols from their lives. And we need to take stock of that and say, what ways are we still clinging to the idols that we have supposedly given up? Other thoughts? Okay, so David does flee, and he flees to Naioth in Ramah. David flees to Samuel at Naioth in Ramah. Samuel hears David is at Naioth in Ramah and sends messengers, but the Spirit of the Lord comes upon them, and they begin prophesying. This happens with the second and the third groups of messengers, verses 20 and 21. Saul goes to Ramah himself, and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and he prophesies too. Verse 24, and he, that's Saul, and he also stripped off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel like in a like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Therefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? And I wanted to contrast this briefly with what we read in chapter 15. 15:35 said, and Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Here, Samuel has come and prophesied before, or Saul has come and prophesied before Samuel. So I'm sort of thinking, how does this compare to verse 35 of chapter 15? I don't know if this is because we're supposed to take chapter 15 very, very, very literally, and when it says Samuel went no more to Saul, that it only means Samuel never went to Saul, but there was a case where Saul came to Samuel. Or if it simply means that there really isn't any meaningful contact between Saul and Samuel. We don't really see them talk to each other. Saul comes, but before he can really say anything to anybody, he's overcome with the Spirit and he prophesies. So chapter 15 may indicate that they never really talked face to face again, and this chapter doesn't necessarily contradict that. I don't really see any real communication between them. Any communication that may have happened is interrupted by this prophecy that overwhelms Saul. So what is the Spirit of God making? Why is the Spirit of God making all these people prophesy? And I know sometimes we don't like to speculate about the reasons when the reasons aren't given. So I have an alternative way of phrasing this question is, what is the result of the Spirit of God making all these people prophesy? So someone want to tackle one of those questions. Either why does this happen or what is the result? David's not killed. Yeah. That was the whole idea. You know, it says messenger, which I think of a messenger as somebody who comes and says hello, but there's kind of a Michael Corleone says hello kind of emphasis here, because we saw use that same word messenger in the previous passages where they were going to kill Saul in his bed. He said he sent the messengers to Saul to David to kill him. So it says messengers, but these are people whose purpose is to see to David's death, and this wave of prophecy that overwhelms them seems to be what prevents that from happening. Eddie.
I go back to this comment earlier about the evil spirits that are terrified of God and recognize His power over them. And I think that's ultimately what's being shown here. They come with the evil spirit or evil intent that they're going to kill David. And every time they get close, God's spirit overpowers that. And instead of killing David, they are now declaring the word of God.
Yes.
That's what a prophet does, to simply declare the word of God. So now they're all speaking the word of God, even Saul himself.
Yeah. Amen. And you said they are now declaring the word of God. I had almost asked the question, what are they prophesying? And I didn't, because I thought, well, we don't want to speculate on what they're prophesying. But you answered the question. We do know what they're prophesying. They're prophesying the word of God. Now, we don't know specifically what it is, but we know they're not out there telling lies. They're not out saying things that don't matter spiritually. They are speaking the word of God, whatever it was in this instance that God wanted them to speak. So they cannot resist that. And as Ben and Eddie have both pointed out, even the evil spirits in the New Testament cannot not resist the power of God. So no matter what their intent is, the Spirit of God can overwhelm them. And instead of killing David, they can wind up being prophets to God if it's the will of God that they do so. And again, the ultimate effect here, I don't know for sure that this is the reason it happens, but I suspect it is. The ultimate effect here is that because they prophesy, they are not able to complete their mission of killing David. So this seems to be the way that God has protected David in this instance. Thoughts, questions? Okay. I don't want to get into verse 20. We've already had one bell, and we started in verse 16, so we've covered a lot today. So I think we'll kind of be overdoing it to try to put anything else in our heads this morning. So I will, since we do have since we do have a little bit of time, rather than wrapping up early, we will wrap up early if there's no questions or comments, but I'll take a moment to sort of throw it out there. Anything we've discussed today any comments you didn't get to make, any questions you didn't get to ask that you'd like to look at? Okay, in that case, for next time, go ahead and read 20 or 21. You can read 22 if you want, but I won't plan on getting it at 22. If somehow we do, we will read it in class. But be prepared by reading 20 and 21, and we'll try to talk about both of those chapters next Sunday. Thank you all.